Welcome to Snack-Sized Civics, a program sponsored by the VFW and the League of Women Voters. This morning we have Jo Evans, who is a retired judge and attorney from the Detroit Lakes area. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Liz Harmon. I'm just hosting. So welcome, Jo. Thank you for being here. We're going to have you talk about freedom of speech today. And what I would like to know is, please tell us, what is freedom of speech, why it's important, and what it would happen if it broke down or went away.
Okay, thank you, Liz. I'm glad to be here this morning, and I hope I can provide a little information that would be helpful to all the viewers out there. Well, first of all, freedom of speech is a term that we throw around maybe kind of loosely in this country. We all talk about what our rights are, and we think we know what our rights are and so forth, but freedom of speech is a concept that arose actually in ancient Greece. As you may know, Greece had an early democracy, perhaps the first democracy, and freedom of speech was important within that government so that people in government could talk freely about their ideas and without fear of reprisal. And freedom of speech is a concept then that kind of it was adopted by other countries as well. It was adopted in England in the Parliament. It was an important idea that members of the House of Commons could speak freely about ideas and freely about governing and the principles of governing. And in our country, the Constitution was adopted in 1791. And part of our Constitution includes the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights are 10 amendments to the Constitution. The first one being one of the most important, if not the most important. And I'd like to just read what the First Amendment is because it includes freedom of speech in that concept. The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And so the First Amendment covers not only freedom of speech, but freedom of the press, the right to petition the government and to assemble, and the right of freedom of religion. So it's a fairly broad amendment. But the First Amendment then again provides that Congress shall make no law that abridges the right of freedom of speech. So it's a limitation on what the government can do. And what is protected? What are we talking about when we're talking about speech? It protects the right to express ideas without government censorship. It covers both written words and spoken words. It covers things like art and music and the media, and also symbolic acts. For instance, flag burning, or the wearing of an armband, things of that nature may be an expression of an opinion, but they're not set into words. But symbolic acts can be the equivalent of speech. It's important to when we talk about freedom of speech, it doesn't mean that we can say anything and do anything that we want to. There are restrictions that can apply. First of all, the concept of freedom of speech, it must be understood that it's a limitation on what the government can do. Again, it says that Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of speech. And so it applies to what the government can do as opposed to what private individuals or companies or organizations can do. For instance, a public school is an arm of the government, and if a public school were to limit free speech, that may be unconstitutional.
Okay.
If there was a city that denied a permit for a parade or something to a group that they didn't happen to agree with. An extreme example would be a group of Nazis wanted to put on a parade in the city of Detroit Lakes. The city could not deny a permit for that based upon their distaste for the viewpoint of the Nazis. So the idea is that if you're going to have free speech, you have to allow all speech, not just speech that you agree with, but speech that that may be distasteful to you as well. So again, it's a limitation on what the government can do in restricting speech, but it's not a limitation necessarily on what private individuals can do or private companies. For instance, if a private employer decides to fire an individual because of distasteful comments they may have made, the private individual may say, well, you've violated my free speech. But if it is a private company, not a governmental entity, they have a right to do that. And so the rights of the employer would be based not on the Constitution, but the rights, if any, would be based on what the employment law would be. So let's see if we could talk about some examples of the type of speech that is protected. Political speech, speech that criticizes the government, or campaigning speech or protests. We talked about symbolic speech like flag burning or wearing of armbands. Unpopular speech, hate speech, can even be protected. Artistic expression in the form of books or movies or plays or media. Religious expression, preaching, religious symbols, religious clothing. Commercial speech, so ads, things of that nature. Now there are limits on the government can impose limits on false and misleading ads, for instance, but simply extolling the virtues of your particular product is not something that the government can be involved in. And internet speech, which is a big topic today. Mm-hmm. All kinds of speech exists on the internet, as you well know, in terms of blogs and memes and podcasts and all kinds of things that are out there. And people, the internet is largely unregulated, and so the government has been discussing getting into that, but so far the regulations are minimal, if any. Why is free speech important? It allows the free expression of ideas and exchange of thoughts. It's important because if we only allow the speech that we agree with, then other ideas cannot come to the fore. And if the government can control speech, then the government can perhaps control thought and punish those that disagree with it. And so if there's only one point of view, there's no change, and it leads into a situation where perhaps we have an authoritarian or dictatorship form of government. As you know, there are countries where speech is severely restricted. In Russia, for instance, if you speak against the government, you're likely to end up in jail, like Mr. Navalny and others that were his supporters. And so it is an extremely important concept, and it would be something that we should never want to lose. We have a lot of discussion now in terms of the internet and so forth, in terms of limiting speech, and in particular types of speech that are unpopular. But it's my view that ought to be resisted. There are some unprotected categories as well, of course. Just because you've got the right to free speech doesn't mean that you can threaten people, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
True threats or incitement to violence, inciting riots, fighting words. The old example is you can't yell fire in a theater. Obscenity can be restricted. Defamation, fraud, and criminal solicitation are
I'm glad you added those things but freedom of speech, but these are some things you can't do. Minnesota's going to sue TikTok to protect children and so on and so forth. Well, this is a subject near and dear to my heart and my family, with a daughter who's a journalist and an editor. So this is really good stuff, Joe, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. It helps us all to get a broader picture of what freedom of speech means. Thank you for joining us today. If you're interested in sponsoring a particular episode of the Snack-Sized Civics, please contact a League of Women Voters member or go to the website located on the screen. Thank you for joining us today, and join us again.